Free speech in the West is not that. That will be too simple. People can still criticize presidents, prime ministers, kings, police, corporations, wars, religions, and political parties. In many Western countries, you can still publish books, make documentaries, protest, start a YouTube channel, or test your government online. So no, the West is not the Soviet Union, it's not Nazi Germany, it's not Imperial Japan, it's not Iran. But here is the uncomfortable question. What if free speech doesn't disappear all at once? What if it slowly becomes narrower? What if governments do not say, we are not allowed to speak? What if they say, we are only protecting safety, we are only fighting misinformation, we are only preventing hatred, we are only protecting children, we are only stopping extremism, we are only maintaining public order? And then, little by little, ordinary people began to ask themselves a dangerous question before they speak. Could this get me investigated? This is where the problem begins, because the real test of free speech is not whether we allow apply popular approved opinions. The real test is whether we allow wrong, offensive, unpopular, and uncomfortable opinions to exist without turning every argument into a police matter. One recent case in Britain shows why people are worried. A viral video showed police officers visiting the home of a mother and asking to recover the phone of her 13-year-old daughter. Online, many people claim their girl was being investigated simply for watching or viewing their social media posts. Western Midlands police denied that and said their case was actually about an alleged fake social media account and indecent malicious messages. Later, the investigation ended with no further action because there was not enough evidence to prosecute. Now, we have to be fair here. If the police version is true, and then was not simply a child looked at like the post and the police cam, then the version is probably too simple. But the reason the story becomes so powerful is not only the legal detail, it's the image placed at the door, a child's phone, a social media investigation, a family suddenly pulled into the criminal justice system because of something allegedly happening online. For many people, that image feels just like the future of speech control, that a dictator standing on a balcony, that soldiers burning books in the street, just just a quiet knock on the door because of something connected to a phone. And this is why the debate is not going away. In Britain, the Online Safety Act was introduced with a very popular goal, protecting children and making the internet safer. Almost everyone agrees that children should be protected from exploitation, abuse, dangerous self-harm content, and predatory behavior. But the law also created new communication offenses, including false communications intended to cause non-trivial harm, spreading communications, cyber flashing, and other online offenses. Platforms can also face very large penalties if they fail to comply with online safety duties. Again, some of this sounds reasonable. Nobody wants direct threats. Nobody wants scams. Nobody wants children harmed online. But the danger is in the vague words. What exactly counts as false? Who decides what harm is non-trivial? How much pressure will platforms feel to remove content before anyone even checks whether it is, illegal? Because when a platform faces a massive fines, the platform doesn't seem like a philosopher. It seems like a corporation. It asks what's safer for us, defends their users' speech, or delete their content. Most of the time, the answer is obvious. Delete first, ask questions later. And this is one of the most important changes in modern censorship. Old censorship looked like a government officer with a red stamp. Modern censorship can look like a safety policy, a content moderation dashboard, a risk assessment, an algorithm, a trusted flagging system where sensing even quieter surveillance. This is where 911 changes the modern Western world. After the September 11 attacks, the United States entered a new era of security politics. The message was simple: we were attacked, so we need more power to prevent the next attack. In that atmosphere, the United States just passed a USA Patriot Act. The official goal was to fight terrorism. And of course, after 9/11, that argument felt powerful. People were scared. They wanted safety. They wanted their government to stop another attack before it happened. But the law also expanded surveillance and investigative powers. It made it easier for the state to connect information, share intelligence, use roving wiretaps, access the records, and monitor, suspected threats. Supporters said this was necessary. Critics warned that America was trading privacy and civil liberties for security. And this is the pattern we keep seeing. A crisis happens, the public becomes afraid, the government asks for more power. The power is described as temporary, necessary, and targeted. But once that power exists, it rarely disappears completely. It becomes a part of the system. It becomes normal. And after a while, the question changes. People stop asking, should the government have this power? They start asking, how much of this power is acceptable? That is why the post-911 era is so important for a video about free speech, because free speech is not only about whether the government deletes your words, it is also about whether the government can watch, track, connect, and store enough information to make people afraid to speak in the first place. If citizens believe their emails, phone calls, search history, messages, online behavior may be monitored, they begin to change their behavior. They may still have their legal right to speak, but psychologically, they become more careful. They think twice before searching a controversial topic. They think twice before criticizing a war. They think twice before messaging someone overseas. They think twice before joining a protest. This is not traditional censorship. This is the chilling effect. And then came Edward Snowden. In 2013, Snowden, a former NSA contractor, leaked documents that revealed secret surveillance programs, including PRISM. PRISM was connected to the NSA's connection of Internet communications under Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. The official explanation was the program targeted non-US persons reasonably believed to be outside the United States, especially for foreign intelligence and national security purposes. But the public reaction was massive because people realized that something much bigger. Modern surveillance did not always need a spy following you on the street. It could happen through the digital systems people use every day. Emails, chats, video calls, stored files, online accounts. The internet itself had become a battlefield between privacy and security. Again, we have to be fair. Governments do have real enemies. Terrorism is real. Foreign espionage is real. Cyber attacks are real. No serious person should pretend that national security doesn't matter. But the Snowden revelations forced the people to ask a different question. Who watches their watchers? If the state can secretly collect massive accounts of digital information in the name of security, how can ordinary citizens know where their line is? And if the line is a secret, can we already call it a public, democratic debate? This connects directly to George Orwell. In 1984, the terrifying thing was not ordinary people watched by Big Brother were punished by it. It was that People behaved as if Big Brother was always watching. That was a deeper warning. A society can still call itself free, but if citizens feel watched all the time, their speech becomes smaller, quieter, and more careful. You do not need to ban every opinion if people are already afraid of being noticed. You do not need to arrest every dissident if everyone knows their system might be watching. Fear doesn't work by itself. In the European Union, the Digital Services Act, or DSA, gives regulators new power over large online platforms. The law includes systems for trusted flaggers, requires the platforms to respond to notices about illegal content, and allows penalties that can reach up to 6% of a company's global annual turnover. Supporters say this is necessary because the giant platforms have become too powerful. They argue that without regulation, illegal content, scams, terrorist content, hate, and misinformation can spread too quickly. But critics worry that their intentions are dangerous if platforms can be punished heavily for living up illegal content, but rarely punished for removing too much speech, then the safest business decision is over removal. That means censorship may not always come directly from government. It can be outsourced. The state pressures their platform. The platform pressures their user, and users learn to be quiet. Germany gives another example. Germany's Network Enforcement Act required large social media companies to remove manifestly unlawful content quickly, sometimes within 24 hours. Human rights groups and legal experts warned that this could push platforms to remove lawful speech because companies would rather avoid larger penalties than defend borderline expression. Once again, the goal sounds reasonable: stop illegal hate speech and threats, but the mechanism creates fear. When the punishment is huge, companies become nervous. When companies become nervous, users become nervous. When users become nervous, public debate becomes smaller. This is not only happening in Europe. In Australia, the Safety Commissioner ordered X from Twitter to remove a word blog post showing a stabbing attempt involving a Bashar in Sydney. X changes the order, and the case becomes a major argument about whether one country's regulator should be able to force the global removal of content from the internet. Now, some people will say, why defend violent footage? But that is not the real question. The deeper question is this: if one national regulator can decide what the whole world may or may not see, then what happens when that free country makes the same demand? What if Iran says that protest video must disappear globally? What if Russia says that war crime video is extremist and must be removed worldwide? The principle matters that even when their content is ugly, Britain also has a protest problem. The Public Order Act 2023 created serious disruption prevention orders. These orders can restrict where a person goes, where they may, and even how they use the internet in relation to a protest activity. Think about that. A free society should be able to punish real violence, vandalism, harassment, and threats. But protest is supposed to be disruptive. Sometimes this is the whole point. A protest that never annoys anyone, never blasts anything, never embarrasses power, and never forces attention is not really a protest. It's just a background noise. So when governments say they are only targeting serious disruption, citizens have to ask who defines serious? The police, the government, the same politician being protested against. Scotland gives another example with its hate crime and public order act. The law created offenses around threatening or abusive behavior intended to stir up hatred against protective groups. Supporters argue that this protects vulnerable communities. Critics argue that vague hate speech laws can chill comedy, religion, political debate, and ordinary conversation. Again, the issue is not whether hatred is good. Hatred is not good. The issue is whether the state can be trusted to define the boundary between hatred, criticism, satire, anger, religion, politics, and unpopular opinion. Because once the government becomes the referee of acceptable emotion, citizens stop speaking naturally. They start acting themselves. And this is the greatest form of censorship. There are also cases where the line is more complicated. For example, after the Southport killings in Britain, Lucy Conley posted a message calling for violence against hotels housing asylum seekers. She later pleaded guilty of disrupting material intended to stir up racial hatred. This was not simply an unpopular opinion. It involved a violent call. But the prison sentence becomes part of a larger public debate about proportionately, selective enforcement, and where exactly the law draws the line between offensive anger and criminal incitement. This is where a serious free speech discussion has to be understood. Free speech doesn't mean you can directly threaten people. It doesn't mean you can incite violence. It doesn't mean you can stop, harass, defraud, or abuse others. But free speech doesn't mean the government should lead a very high standard before turning words into crimes. The law should be clear. The harm should be direct. The process should be transparent, and the parent and the punishment should be proportional. Because history shows us what happens when the government uses vague words to control speech. In the Soviet Union, dissidents were punished under laws against anti-Soviet agitation and propaganda. Underworld writing had to be secretly copied and circulated because the state controls official publication. Notice their language, standards, fabrications, anti-Soviet Union, undermining the state. Those words sound like they are about protecting truth and public order, but in practice, they protected power. This is the lesson. Authoritarian censorship rarely introduces itself as a censorship. It introduces itself as a protection from lies, protection from disorder, protection from enemies, protection from dangerous ideas. Imperial Japan did the same thing. The Peace Preservation Law of 1925 was used to suppress socialists, communists, and other political opponents. It criminalized attempts to change the kokutai, meaning the national essence or political order of Japan. The term was vague, and that vagueness allows authorities to target many forms of opposition as threats to the state. Again, the lesson is not that modern Britain is an imperial Japan. It's not. The lesson is that vague political language is dangerous. National essence, public order, dangerous speech, anti-state propaganda, harmful misinformation. Different systems use different words, but the structure can reason. Iran gives us a more modern example. Iran heavily restricts online freedom. Iranian authorities have used internet shutdowns, pressure toward domestic platforms, monitoring vague restrictions, and harsh punishments to control online discussion. People self-censor because they know their state is watching. This is the end stage of speech control. Not every person needs to be arrested. Not every post needs to be deleted. If people believe their state might punish them, many will punish themselves first. They will not post. They will not jail. They will not question. They will not organize. They will not speak. Fascist regions understood this too. In Nazi Germany, censorship and propaganda worked together. The region suppressed the ideas it considered, spreading controlled media and culture and staged bill burnings in 1933, where students and supporters burned books by Jewish left-wing pacifists and other un-German writers. Bill burning is the old image of censorship. It is dramatic, it is easy to recognize, but the modern version may be less dramatic, more efficient. You do not need to burn a book if an algorithm can hide it. You do not need to arrest every dissident if a payment processor can cut them off. You do not need to ban every opinion if everyone is afraid of being reported, flagged, demonetized, investigated, watched, or publicly destroyed. This is why George Orwell still matters. Orwell's Animal Farm and 1984 are not just the stories about one dictatorship. They are warnings about language, memory, propaganda, surveillance, and power. Animal Farm itself had publication difficulties in wartime UK because it criticized Stalin's Soviet Union at a time when the Soviet Union was Britain's ally. The book later became famous as an attack on dictatorship, but its early history shows that something important. Censorship is not always imposed by an obvious tyrant. Sometimes it appears as self-censorship, political convenience, or fear of embarrassing an ally. This is why Orwell is so useful for today. He reminds us that the greatest danger is not only the government, banning words. It is the government changing the meaning of words. Word becomes the peace. Control becomes the safety. Censorship becomes the content moderation. Propaganda becomes the public information. Surveillance becomes the child protection. And fear becomes the responsibility. A free society does not exist because everyone is good. It exists because power is dangerous. People can lie, people can be cruel, people can say stupid things, but governments can do something awful or worse. Governments can turn mistakes into crimes, opinions into evidence, jokes into investigations, and dissidents into extremists. So what should a free society do? It should, punish real threats. It should punish direct incitement to violence. It should punish fraud, harassment, stalking, and genuine criminal abuse. It should protect children from exploitation. It should also protect people from terrorism and foreign threats. But it should keep the line very clear. No vague speech crimes, no secret government pressure on platforms, no global takedown orders unless the legal standard is extremely high, no criminal investigation for ordinary political opinion, no treating every offensive statement as a public safety emergency, no pretending that surveillance had nothing to do with free speech, and no pretending that censorship is not censorship just because it is done through private companies, because once speech control becomes normal, it almost never stays limited to the people we dislike. Today, it may be used against racists, tomorrow against the religious conservatives, the next day against the climate activists, then against the anti-war protesters, then against the journalists, then against the ordinary citizens who made one angry post at the wrong time. That is why free speech has to protect people we disagree with, not because they are always right, but because one day we may be the unpopular ones. The West still has the stronger free speech protections than many authoritarian systems. That should be acknowledged, but it also has a growing free speech problem. The problem is not one single law, it's a pattern. Vague online safety laws, broad hate speech rules, protest restrictions, platform pressure, trusted flaggers, huge fines, police investigations over digital behavior, age verification systems, global takedown demands, post 911 surveillance powers, slogans, prisons, revelations, and a culture where people are increasingly afraid to say wrong thing. This is not yet 1984, but it is exactly the kind of George Orwell warned about. Not because the Big Brother arrives overnight, but because people slowly accept the idea that freedom is dangerous, speech is harm, surveillance is safety, and silence is responsibility. And when the idea becomes normal, the government doesn't need to ban every book, it only needs to teach people one habit. Before you speak, be afraid. And that is when free speech begins to die. Not with a fine, not with a gun, not with a dramatic announcement, but with a knock on the door, a deleted post, a frozen account, a vague law, a watched phone, and a citizen who decides it is safer to say nothing. So the question is not whether the West still is free. The question is how much freedom is the West willing to trade away in order to feel safe? And once that freedom is gone, who will have the power to give it back?